and broadcaster for the BBC. So over to you, Rachel and James.
Thank you very much. I have to say, James, this is a bit strange because I'm used to now doing these whiskey podcasts. So I'm talking to you while drinking a glass of water, and it's not really me at all. I'm a bit... I want to start and go Speyside or Isla, and I can't. So I have to get in a different head on. So I have quite a lot of questions for you about how to compete, like how to enter your book into the international market. But the very first question I would like to know is, do you think it's possible in 2020 to write some children's books about wizards and become a billionaire?
Not to become a billionaire, because the thing is, well, maybe to become a billionaire, but the thing is, like, to become a billionaire in any field, not only writing a kid's book, it's just like going into space, something that it may happen to you if you wish hard enough, but it's something which doesn't really happen. And I don't think it's something you should aim for. However, I think that writing kids' books, writing any sort of books, 2020, 2021, as always, actually, humanity has been trying to communicate ever since we're here. So it's a very good year, like any. So most of the authors I'm working with, actually, at the end of this year, there's quite a lot of people publishing, so out of my group of authors, a lot more than like last year, and a lot more than the year before. So it's a very good year to publish anything, even kids' stories.
So if you're going to write a kid's story about a wizard, how do you kind of find your niche, do you think? How do you want to write a book and you're not exactly sure what it is that you have to offer in a book? How do you find what you want to write, and then how do you go researching about the market that you're going to enter? Because I think a lot of people just kind of sit down and dream, and they write something and they're not really sure what niche it's supposed to be, and they're not sure what market it's in either. How do you work those two things out?
Well, it's the thing is, one thing is writing, another thing is publishing, and if we and for both, for writing and publishing, we need to know our market. As I said a few minutes before, Rachel, it's like in any field of life, in any walk of life nowadays, you have to know your market. But anyway, not necessarily for a wizard, but if it is for a wizard, so you've got to try and think like what culture you're right into. Some cultures of the world, they're more accepting of wizards, and others aren't. I'll come back to that anyway. But like in more general terms, we have to think nowadays, because of the way things have been moving for the past few months, we have to think of our language area. I coined an expression which I've been using with my authors, which is the new language geography. It's very important now to remind ourselves that we are not writing to Britain only or to India only. However, for example, whoever used to write in English was more used to writing to many different English-speaking countries. But when it comes to like writing in other languages, like Portuguese, like Spanish, the Portuguese and the Portuguese speakers, the Spanish speakers, they tend to forget that they're inserted in the number 2 or number 3 language area in the world. So the thing is, like, the first thing is try and understand what this language area is all about.
So how would you do that if you were talking about Spanish? How would you understand what the language area was about?
Well, first you get like a world map on Google, and you can have a list of like Spanish-speaking countries. And in these Spanish-speaking countries, you've got like writers associations, you've got authors, you can spend hours just virtually visiting these countries, and events like ours now, they're being promoted all over the world in many different languages. Now, join these events in your language. Like, for example, when I'm having mine now in Portuguese, I've got like people from Angola, from Mozambique, from Brazil, all areas, Portugal, all areas, Portuguese speakers from America, from Switzerland, Holland this weekend, etc. So it means like find your language geography, your area. This is really very important because that is your new catchment area.
So
And
if your language is English, generally that's a really very big catchment area, which is both an advantage and a disadvantage in that it's a bigger area, but there's lots more competition. So how would you recommend that somebody in South Africa or
so
somebody?
that's why when I mentioned culture,
Mhm.
I said I'm going to go back to that.
Mhm. So tell me about that then.
I decided to mention other areas, but like in English, you have to think in terms of culture. And actually, there's two uh, two sides to the English language.
Mhm.
One is what's called universal English. So it means you can write your wizard story in international English. There's a type of English which we also call plain English. And you can write your story using easy readers techniques, for example. So that means that that can be enjoyed all over the world for people who have English as a second or as a foreign language. They don't even have to understand it well or speak it well. So that's one thing. So number one. Number two is you write to English speakers all over the world. However, English is spoken by so many countries and across so many cultures. Then you have to have this within this geography. Uh, Decide on your cultural area. So you have to decide on that. So, for example, if you decide to write a wizard and you want to appeal to India,
Mhm.
definitely have to make a few adjustments. But for example, if you're writing your wizard, and if you have to appeal to the Falkland Islands, for example, you don't have to make any sort of adaptation at all. So
Mhm.
it's fascinating when we come to English as a language. So in a way, when I mention that, it's just like it's akin to when people used to write in Latin. Uh, So Latin was uh, read, not necessarily spoken, but read all over Europe at a certain point. And you couldn't simply say in Rome, oh, I'm just going to write something and everybody's going to read and understand it. But you could say, well, hold on a minute, the Iberia. So we can write something for Iberia. Northern Africa, you can write something for Northern Africa. So English is very much like Latin in those days. And you have this the church Latin, which somehow people used to enjoy all over the Latin speaking world of those days. So now it's English.
So one of the things, so if you've got your language niche, but what I would want to say is if you were writing fiction, you've got your genre niche. Are you going to do literary fiction? Are you going to do crime fiction? Are you going to do romantic fiction? Or if you're doing non-fiction, where do you fit into the world of books? How do you? I mean, that sounds really obvious, but how do you work those things out? But what you want to do, and how would you get to know your niche well?
Well, the moment you decide your area, the moment you decide uh, your geographical area, your language area, etc. Thing is about genres. They tend to be about the same, save a few exceptions, all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you're going to decide to write like crime fiction, you can write that to any of these areas anyway. If you want to write fantasy, science fiction, so that's very, very universal. We're going through a day and age now that good crime fiction is good crime fiction. Uh, a good love story is a good love story. Save, of course, some exceptions, but that's the way it is. So I don't see any problem there. So if what you have to be aware of, back again to this language area, is that if you're writing, for example, in English, and you want to reach a wider audience all over the world, not necessarily in English-speaking countries, how about writing in a more simplified English, like plain English? Because
Mm-hmm.
plain English can be translated into most languages very, very easily. I just a few months ago, I had David, actually a chap from Scotland, and he wrote 5 or 6 books in plain English, stories like crime stories or detective stories involving his version of Sherlock Holmes, and I decided to take his stories to Brazil. Actually, just now I think 3 or 4 of his books have been published in Brazil. And as he wrote in this very simplified version of English, I think he was an English teacher abroad or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Placed to Portuguese, it took us something like half a day because in those days we went to Sistran, it's a kind of glamorized Google, and you just click and it's all there in Portuguese. As it's plain English, and English is like a base language to translate to and from, we just had to adjust. I think like Marcelo, who did it for me, I think it took about half a day to get the thing organized and one day to revise, and that was it. So so it's very easily done, but you have to be
So
aware of.
if you're going to write in very plain English, I mean, then you have to also be aware of if your reader isn't going to focus on your language, because a lot of people read books because of the beautiful language. I mean, Saramago is really hard to translate into English. He's hard to read in English, but he's worth the effort. If you're not going to be interested in the language, what is it then in your niche? If your niche is going to be plain English, what do you have to focus on?
Then your niche would be like your geographic area.
Mm-hmm.
So so I'm just
No,
talking
but
about.
if you're not going to focus on the language and on the sentences and on the beauty of the language.
You focus on story,
Mm-hmm.
because you think most of the stories being told in the world nowadays, they are not focused on the beauty of language.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest plays ever written, anything like that. They're actually Marvel comics, all the Netflix series. So it's all done very simply, very beautifully. Yeah. So literature follows the times. So that's the way it is nowadays. If you want, the thing is, like, because the way I put it, right, I don't want to give the impression that I'm against literary a piece of literary work. Not at all. There's of course a niche for that, but what I mean is, if you want to reach out and be read worldwide, so that's like a piece of advice.
And I think it's a very different way of working. So a lot of people, especially if they do sort of literature courses, it's very much about the work as a piece of art, whereas you're describing it, the work as a piece of work. And I think that's because I think too many writers have this idea that they are geniuses and that they are going to be discovered and they are going to be billionaires. And I
Some
think,
are, some are.
but very few. There's maybe like what, 2 in the world, and there's a lot of people in the world.
That's right. That's when you mentioned the billionaire. I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, it's kind of like going to space as an astronaut. So I'm not talking about those people. I'm just talking
Mm-hmm.
about, like, I don't know,
So
like
how would you say that you would focus on your story? What are the really, if you're going to write in plain English, and so no one's reading your book because the beauty of the language, what is it that you,
well,
because that's both good and bad, because the good thing is you're not having to focus on the sentences. The bad thing is no one can forgive you. You cannot get out of not having a perfect story.
true. Yeah. Well, more likely anyway. So it's more likely. What we have to remember is that no story is perfect. Otherwise, robots, would be writing stories nowadays. So it's uh, like a bit of noise in a story. is actually very nice. It shows it's been written by a human being. Anyway, however, you do have to remember that stories have structures. So you have to structure your story the way that kind of story is structured nowadays. So you've got to remember that you have to have a way of like drawing the attention to a scene. The scene has got to be really clear cut. You've got to remember that the characters got to be clear. What the character's objectives are have to be clear. If the character doesn't actually achieve what is there, what is up to, he may fall into some sort of hell. It's the end of his universe, and then he fights, and he fights as much as he can, and then he could win, but he never wins 100%. There's always something left, and then, of course, he's got to think about it, a bit of reflection, and then he does a bit of dilemma. Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? And then he makes a decision, and that decision becomes the next objective of the next scene. And we've got the likes of James Patterson. I'm such a huge fan of James Patterson. Some people say, but James, it's not literature. Yes, but it sells millions and millions and millions and millions. So it is literature. Yeah, I'm sure that like 500 years from now, is going to be studied as a genre, as a type of writing for the 21st century. And if you read some of his books, you can see how well structured they are. But
Yes.
of course, if you want like art, go and do it. However, if you want to sell, if you want to really appeal to people all over, if you want to write in plain English to be easily translated, that's fine. So there's no problem at all. So there's a market for that. Because one
Yes,
of
I mean, they're quite different things. Because what you're saying about the story in the end, I mean, one of the biggest sellers is romantic fiction and comedy fiction. And, you know, that is one of the biggest sellers in Britain and the United States. And you start on page 1 and you know exactly how it's going to end. You know from the minute you're on page 1 or 2 and you know exactly what's going to happen to the heroine, and you still read it, and they are not that easy to write. They still require a lot of work. The women who I know who do really well out of them are incredibly clever, incredibly hardworking women.
And the thing is, we have to remember that the world has moved from a book being an object to just being like a piece of entertainment. You know, why not? Why can we not entertain ourselves by just reading a book? You know, so why do you have to get this piece of paper, whatever, and with these leaves and leaf through this thing, and then you have all these very difficult sentences. You have to go to a dictionary. You have to read a sentence and think of the message and interpret everything, and say, oh, how wonderful this is. And you don't have to. You know, I mean, you can also do it. You know,
Yes.
but why not think of like music, like the music industry, like the cinema industry. Yeah, let's make it beautiful, but like an industry. Yeah. So because the thing is, like, if you're going to publish one of these very difficult books, like for example Saramago, when you think the number of books that Saramago sells in Brazil and Portugal, they're less than James Patterson, who's an American author translated by someone who in pounds would be earning like £100 to translate one of his books. And he sells a lot more than Saramago. So that shows that people want to read books to entertain themselves, and that's fine, because you have to get started somehow. Some kid may start reading James Patterson, then that kid may say, oh, I'm going to read Harry Potter, and then they may say, oh, you know, why not War and Peace? You know, So one thing at a time.
So part of that writing. Also, I do think as an author, I think when you write something that's commercially successful, I think you put yourself in a position of much more power to then dictate what you're going to write. Natalie, who we've got coming in the middle of November, she very much did that. Her first novel was very successful, was a thriller. And after that, she wrote what she actually wanted to write. And I think it gives you more power as a writer in your career. And again, it's that thing where people are often so, to me, they're taught so much about how writing is an art, but it's also a business and it's a career, and you have to make strategic career decisions.
Yes, absolutely. You know, when I'm writing my own books, I do a lot of research. When I'm researching, it's not necessarily for what I want to say, but I I I tend to write about what people want to read.
So
And
how
that's
do
why
so how would you gain insights into that? Say we are talking about, you are in, for example, South Africa, and you're wanting to start writing romantic fiction, and you want to do it really well. You're very clever. You're a very good writer. What kind of market research would you think someone would do if they wanted to do that?
to write what genre or
Romantic fiction.
romantic fiction. Well, there are many ways to find out how it's doing. You don't have to go to the likes of Nielsen Bookscan, but for example, you can go to Amazon.com, and there you can very easily see who's writing what, who's selling well, or you can actually go to I'm trying to think of like free ways of doing that. You can go to the New York bestseller list, which is freely available, and then you see who's selling, who's not selling. Sold, because some people get into the list and they stay there for like a week.
Ever.
And other people are there forever. So try to study these people who are there forever. Why? Why is that? And one of the things that I do nowadays when I'm writing something, uh, quite often I do that. I find someone online who is selling well, or at least who I think is selling well, and then I try to find out how well that person is selling. If that person is really selling well, I write to that person, because nowadays everybody is available. You don't have to write through an agent. So I write to that. So hello, I'm James. I'm writing a book about this and that, and I saw you wrote about that. People are really interested. How did you do it? Uh, do you think that they want to know more about that? And I cannot remember one single case in which I have not received a very friendly reply.
Yes.
So it's like a community, because the thing is, like, whoever is a famous writer today, that person knows that there was like a way, or a very, he had to traverse very choppy seas to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a empathy.
There's no writer in the world that doesn't like an email saying, I loved your book.
Absolutely. Yes. And then people reply and it starts from there.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be in South Africa or anywhere in the world. If you want to write about something, you go, you ask your best friend to help you, which is Google.
Mm-hmm. So you basically, because I think there are some people who don't want to read another genre because another book in the same genre because it might influence them. But I always think if you want to write romantic fiction, you have to know the rules, and the rules are slightly more than on page 1 you have to meet the guy that she's going to end up with. It still has to be good. You have to understand why Mary McFarlane sells as much as she does, why Jojo Moyes sells as much as she does.
Yes, because of things like when as an editor, I cannot remember like every structure, but I've got like a manual on my desk, and if someone says, "Oh, I've just written this detective story," so you've got a paradigm for detective stories. And then I say, well, no, how many pages have got in the manuscript here? Well, let's suppose about 100 pages. Very well. So by page 25, something has got to happen. By page, if it's 100 pages, of course, so by page 90, I've got to know who killed whom and how. And you've got pages for the payoff, and you've got like about 1 page to amaze us, and if there is going to be any sort of sequel to that book, you've got like a few lines to commercially make me want to buy the next one. If it's not there in the manuscript, I say, well, no, this person likes detective stories, but doesn't know how to write them.
Yes, I mean, I think there is again a problem that you can break the rules if you're a genius, but to break the rules, you have to know the rules like the back of your hand. And I think
Absolutely.
too many people think, but I'm a genius, I don't need to follow the rules. And it's like, no, geniuses know the rules and can follow them and have followed them so often they know them inside out and back to front, and then they've broken them. If you've not been published, if this is your first book, you're not a genius yet.
One of the things which came to my mind now, it's about romantic fiction. I get questions of people saying, James, is there any book that you can recommend to help me write romantic fiction?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, yes, any Mills and Boons or Harlequin, you know. Oh, you know, but what do I do with the book? So first, read it. Read it. Second, if you've got this magical object called a pen or a marker or a pencil, go through the book and start saying, oh, so that's how she did it. That's when this happened. That's when this happened. And then if you care to read this book backwards from the back and say, how did they get to that point in this Mills and Bones romantic book that I felt something like tightening my throat? How did they get to that point? Then you study how the author led you to feel that way. Why do I think that description was so amazing? Let's see how to do it. Because descriptions, there's no book to teach you how to do it. It's like it's from peer to peer. It's contagious. You learn to do it. You acquire a sense of how to do it. So go to a Mills and Bones book, read it, study it. If like 5 books, and if you do study them, and they cost nothing, you go to a secondhand bookshop, they must cost like a few pennies each. Study them. I want my detective story to be or my thriller to be just like James Patterson. What do I do? Is there a James Patterson's manual? No, you've got his books. Go and study his books. I didn't know you were going to ask me that, but I've got like even behind me some of James Patterson's books. When I was learning how to write cliffhangers, I must have studied something like 7 or 8 of his books, copying out each one of the cliffhangers, trying to understand why they were so powerful, recreate them. Because the thing is, like, a structure is not copyrighted. A structure is a structure. So that's the way to do it. So the mentality, which at times is kind of strange, is that like people sit somewhere in the world and they say, oh, I've just written my novel. Isn't that nice? Yes, it is. It's a fantastic achievement. Does anyone want to publish it? Yes, you, my darling, you want to publish it. What are you going to do about it? Or can I send it to someone to do something about it? No, not anymore. Because this sending something for someone to do something about it, about 100 years ago, yes, it was the only way to do it. Now, you've got everything around you. You've got your screen, you've got your keyboard, you've got your mouse, you've got your whatever, your pen, your pencil. Just do it. Take action.
Again, I think the problem again with a book is people have to remember it's a piece of work. It's not you. And even if you're writing literary fiction and it's a piece of art. It's still a piece of work that you put a lot of work into, but it's not you. And it might need, and it needs work on it. It needs refinement once it's come out of you. That even the best writer in the world needs a lot of refinement to anything, which I think again is something that people find really hard. I mean, I remember years ago, if I was at university doing like a creative writing course, and you know, people would be giving out their short stories and they were rubbish because we were about 19 and they were all rubbish and we were all just starting, but there was some of them that had something in them that was quite good, and people were crying and shaking because it was like they were giving their heart to us, and you're going, oh, this is a piece of work that you can work on, rather than something that's, you're not giving me your heart, you're giving me your work. And it's a different thing.
Because it seems like before writing, I'll try to structure more what I can actually help people watching us today. And I'm not talking to authors from the 19th or 20th century. I'm talking to people now. First, now we have to take control. Because the thing is, some people ask me, like, James, how can I get an agent? It's very difficult to get an agent. An agent has got to get you. So to do it, to get started, first thing is write something, take control, get someone to help you structure a book if you don't know how, get someone to help you edit your book if you don't know how, or learn how to do it yourself. Then you have to create what I call a launch plan. And creating a launch plan is right. I'm writing this story, but how am I'm not saying we, I'm not saying me and my agent, how am I going to show the world that I wrote this story? And now we can show the world very easily because I've got this tiny little eye in front of me, and I can be creative with it. Go and tell. Some people say, well, but how can I tell the world? It's so vast. Yes, but you can tell your cousins. You can tell your cousin's friends. You can tell your cousin friends' friends. You can tell your teachers. You can tell someone in your village, and etc. So I mean, if you have this plan, like for example, of reaching people to know that you wrote something, your community. When you launch your book, you may sell something like, I don't know, 500. However, one of the things, Rachel, that people say is, but James, that takes a long time. Usually if I start today, how long will that take? And I'd say that that's going to take something like between 6 months and 1 year or longer. Because the thing is that there's quite a lot of competition. Many people are looking at these little eyes in front of us. However, you have to prod on and you're going to get there. So you have to be patient. But the moment you know that you have this community kind of buzzing, wanting what you wrote, then you may say, right, let me have like a pre-launch campaign. So you may ask like your immediate family and friends saying, well, I'm going to launch my book. Would you like to pre-order? It's just like £5. So you see, it's like £5, but if you go like £5 times 100 people, so you've got £500. That's good enough for your pre-launch. Then some people say, James, so how long before I launch my book do I have to have this pre-launching campaign? Well, first, the book has got to be ready, because some authors, they get, especially the newbies, they get so focused on, oh, I'm going to be a success, they haven't finished the story, or they haven't finished the story properly, and they're pre-launching the story. That's very dangerous. I mean, that might expose you to ridiculous situations. So you have to have this like 3 months before launching. Then after that, like a month or so before launching, you can start having organizing your launching parties online. Like many birthday parties are online nowadays. Any platform, and you may say, well, Rachel, today I'm going to launch my book to you and your friends in Scotland. So you just invite your friends in Scotland. Then I'm going to say, hello, Scotland, I'm here. I'm going to launch my books. I have a chat with people, and they can buy that online, or they can buy on print on demand. So that can be organized something like a month before. Then come like the day of your party, you've got to be ready, like you have to be ready for any party. And
I
then
think
people,
I think it's that thing of people want. I think some people want just to be able to write a book and kind of send it off and then forget about it. And I don't. That's not the world anymore. You can't. You have. You do have to really logically have have a Beverly with an Excel file with a checklist of the 30 things that you need to do to launch your book, and you need to go through it like a job. And I think, again, I think people find that people that write books are quite creative find that quite hard. And I think, there must, but you do have to get your head around it. You have to sell it yourself, even if you have a publisher. Because, I mean, I got quite a lot of PR when my book came out, and there was novelists of friends of mine who had only been published in Scotland. And they said, oh, did your publisher do all that PR? And I just looked at them and laughed. And I said, no, I think they got one piece. I did everything. I did everything myself. That piece that you saw, I know the journalist. That piece that you saw, I made that happen. That event, I wrote to them. I did everything. And I had a London publisher. I had Simon & Schuster, and everybody thought it was amazing. And you still have to do everything yourself.
absolutely, because the things like your publisher, if they're publishing the likes of Michelle Obama,
And they're not going to be interested in me.
But the things like, how many Michelle Obamas are there in the world? Of course, they're interested in that, interested in 2 or 3. As I was telling you before our chat now. So I'm opening this publishing house in Portugal. Yes, we have 2 or 3 people that I've been in contact with the lawyers, not even agents, to see if we can publish them there to get started. But for example, our portfolio has more than 1,000 published authors, all of them selling somehow. But we just talked to 2 or 3, so the other ones have to do their own stuff, Otherwise, we wouldn't publish that. But the thing is, just to finalize what we were talking about before, this launching party. Some people say, well, that's going to be boring because when you have like your book signing night, you've got the table, you've got the pen, you've got the friends. Just last week, I got an email from this chap in Northeast Brazil. And it says, James, I've just bought one of your books, and my dream was to be in Sao Paulo when you're launching it. But of course, it's miles away, so I couldn't go. And my dream is, have your signature. Could you say something? Can I send you my book, my copy, by post? Then you write something and send it back to me. And I said, how old are you? And he says, well, I'm 19. And I said, oh, 19 old people, they live in this very old world. When you're about 64, you do live in the present. I said, no problem. What's going to happen now is, if you want to, I can send you a little bit of money, and you go to any bookshop and you buy one of those stickers, a white piece of sticker. And I said, you're going to have a surprise. What I did is I wrote something very nice and signed. I used my mobile, and I've got a scanning program here, which is C-Scan or something. Took a photograph of that, changed that into PDF, cleared, so that's nice and white, sent that. I asked him to print. He printed, and he glued that to the first page of his book.
So he had this dedication that he wanted.
Absolutely, and now I'm launching something else at the end of this year, and my publisher was just saying, can you actually do that And I said, of course, because the thing is, I don't even need a scanner, which I don't have one on this table. So I may buy one of these small scanners, and whoever buys the book, I'll just send that. They can print. They can print in one of these stick papers, but they can also print that like a white piece of paper and have that with the book.
That is a
So
wonderful idea, especially right now. I know a friend of mine just published this really, really good cookbook about pies, and Callum Franklin, and his restaurant and him, they're all in a state because of COVID. He can't sign the books, and I'm going to say to him, actually, just scan your signature, and then the restaurant can just email it out to people, and they can print
because
it out.
just scanning a signature, people may say, well, that's not for me, because the
No,
beauty.
but you can sign it to so and put in a dedication, and that's it.
So and that's something I'm going to do towards the end of this year when I launch my next book. Is people are gonna be like lining up on Zoom, and I'm gonna be talking to them, and
Mm-hmm.
let's use. I write something, take the photograph, send, and then I talk to Desiree, I talk to Cynthia, and it's just normal, like normal.
That is such a good idea.
So there's so
That
many ways, as you can see, so it's just a matter of user imagination, not only to write, but
but
also to promote. Remember that now you are the boss.
that was wonderful. It was a great talk. Thank you very much. And I am going to what I'm going to do. A friend of mine wants to buy 5 of my books for Christmas for his friends, and I'm going to say to him, does he want, after they've bought the book, have a Zoom whiskey tasting reading for his friends? So he's not just giving them a book, he's giving them an event. Because I mean, it's not like it's winter. I'm not going to go anywhere. So that's a brilliant idea. So I am now going to use that. I hope everybody else listening has found at least one idea that they can use themselves. Now, Beverly, do we have any questions for James?
Yes, we do. Betty has asked, which of the English-speaking countries publish more children's books?
America.
Is there any particular reason?
They're bigger.
Population. But the thing is, like, if you ask me which one publishes the best, I'd say Britain.
Okay. And then Betty's also asked, is there a publisher focused on COVID stories for children?
Not really. No. I had a good look.
They don't want them.
No. Because the thing is, like, COVID is here. Just I know some people may say, well, it's not true, but it's just here for now. Nobody's going to invest in like a book talking about COVID. And as I said, like just a pre-launch event takes about 6 months to 1 year to prepare. Like let's add 1 year to prepare. Let's suppose like 3 months to write, 3 months to edit, 1 year preparing the launching, then 6 months or 3 months at least preparing the pre-launching, then a week, then the launching parties. That's 2.5 years. In 2.5 years from now, people are going to say, COVID what?
Mm-hmm. It's the same with television and radio. Nobody in television or radio wants any COVID stories, and they didn't want them in April. And in March, they wanted some that could be out like in April and May and June. But now nobody wants any COVID stories for either radio or television.
When we are writing in any book, we have to think of the future. We have to project ourselves into the future. What's that people will want to read in the future? Forget about the past and even forget about the present. Just when people say, "Oh, I'm just going to write something against that politician," it's a waste of time. Oh, but what if he's re-elected? Yes, for 4 years. So no. Stories tend to be universal. Write something which is very particular, which can be very universal. Yeah, you can write about this kid who wasn't sure who he was, and he finds out he's a wizard, and he lost and misses his parents, and he's got a funny mark on his forehead, so that kind of thing tends to sell.
Okay, thanks for that. Desiree has asked, in that case, and that was really about learning from other authors, is there a problem with a story that starts in the 1990s and the denouement occurs in 2007? Has James frozen? Hello?
You frozen, James?
We all froze for a second.
Oh, it's been going in and out for a little bit, isn't it?
That's right, yes. So
Okay, so I'll ask the question again. In fact, Desiree's asked two questions. I missed the first question, so I'll ask the first question first.
No, sorry, Bev. The second question is relating to what
I know, I realised my mistake.
About.
I realised my mistake. Thanks, Desi. So the first question was, do you think it's possible for someone who has read voraciously to instinctively have a feel for these storytelling structures and strategies?
Reading is one thing, studying the text is another. Of course, being a reader is one of the prerequisites to be a good writer. However, just reading does not teach you how to do it. It's just, for example, me. I love sculptures. I do love sculptures. I can spend hours in a museum just walking around. I've no idea how to sculpt anything. Just being a consumer of art does not make you an artist. You've got to do and learn how to do it. As you yourself know, and Rachel know, we've got all these friends I work with, or they're just my friends and the big stars and on the stage, cinema, etc. I cannot act in front of a camera. So that's it. If I want to, I'd have to learn how to do it.
Can I just expand then on the question? So, for example, we go to school, we're taught about writing, enter competitions, get published, go to university, go to colleges, and again, we're taught literature. I was interested in your comments about breaking the rules, Rachel, because we were taught that Agatha Christie made sure she broke exactly one rule. We were given all the rules and then shown which books broke which rules. Almost every book, if not every book. But and then, studying literature, etc. at university, quite a lot of some of the things over time that you've spoken about, James, I've sort of thought, I don't know if it's learned behavior that I didn't really appreciate I was picking up during this long time, but a lot of it felt instinctive to me.
Some people do, absolutely. You're not wrong at all, but the thing is, like, it doesn't apply to everybody, and the thing is, to most writers, they don't study literature, so I also went to school to do literature, but and I had some sort of feeling as well, how that story worked. However, you have to learn, the ropes. It's a very competitive market, so however, I understand that it's just like music. Some people have got to go to a music school and learn everything, and have to learn how to read music, write music, etc. before they do anything. And if we go on YouTube, you see like a 2-year-old, he sits on a piano for the first time and goes like, some people say that that's like evidence of a past life, So, we end up talking about the paranormal to explain that. But for us, mere mortals, we have to learn, so there's no other way around it. And even if you have this instinct, you'd still have to learn. You know, it's just some people have got this instinct for painting, for example, but they still have to learn one thing or two. Yeah.
I suppose it's that thing of learning from example, isn't it? I mean, it's what you were saying earlier. There's some people who are successful and they're selling thousands of copies of books, and over again, they've got something in them beyond talent that makes their work stand out. And that's what today's about. And one of the tips you mentioned was to model ourselves and our writing on what they're doing well, and how can we take that and make it our own, and you wrap our stories around it. And there'll be a day where someone is keep on breaking those boundaries over and over and over again. New talent, new interest, new convergence of best practice, constantly growing that piece of work. So yeah, we have to learn from each other. I think it's Steve Jobs who said, we connect the dots from the past, bring it into the present to make the future.
Absolutely. Yes, that's what I said. We have to project into the future all the time.
Yeah, I think Desiree had another question. In that case, is there a problem with a story that starts in the 1990s and the denouement occurs in 2007?
Oh, yeah.
That's where you were talking, James.
That's right, yes.
In response to Betty's question about COVID, and you said in 2.5 years' time, it's not going to be relevant.
No, but that's how as far as I understood the question was like, is there any publisher focused on COVID now? Let's publish COVID stories. No, that's not the case. But however, COVID, like the Second World War, is part of human history now. So of course you can have a story which is, there's going to be many COVID stories, or COVID is going to be part of the story, or of the stories. It's just like the Twin Towers in America. Yeah, they're part of films, and it's part of human history. Yeah. But you may say, well, I want to go online and I'm going to get like COVID stories, focusing on that. I want my kid not to cry when he cannot go to school, etc. So nobody's focused on that as such. However, all over the world, there are many parents actually producing material, teachers, for kids, who want to understand more about that.
Okay, we can take one last question from Alexandra. And he says, what can a common author do to improve his chances to enter into international and world markets?
There's got to have something very well translated into English. This is one of the main problems, because the thing is, at times people want to take control, and they say, oh, my book is translated into English, and when you read it in English, it reads like a translation. And English-speaking people, they're not used to, they don't excuse people for not using English well. It's cruel, actually. Yeah.
So then, James, isn't that a problem of the person doing the translation,
absolutely,
rather than the authoring?
Of course, yes, I know, yeah, because the thing is, like, because authors usually all over the world, I'm generalizing here, sorry to say that, so we have a very frank conversation. People don't invest very much in their career. Some don't invest because they don't think it's necessary, others because they don't have the means. Fair enough. However, if you want to be your boss and reach out for the international market, whatever you show, and it's got to be shown in English, has got to be in what they call word perfect. It's got to read in English as if it was written in English. The other day I was talking to this in Portugal now, last week. I was talking to this English chap who may help us editing some of these books for this publishing house we're launching there. And then he says, "Oh, look at that." You know, he says, "This Portuguese person wants to publish like in America or in Australia, whatever. Look at that. You know, he doesn't know how to differentiate to begin from to start." And then we read the sentence, you know, and then I thought, well, I know this collocation and things like that. You know, it read as if it was like both sentences right. And he said, well, I've got this feeling, he says, because he couldn't explain that either. So it means that English speakers in countries like America, Britain, Australia, Canada, the Big Five, New Zealand, they're very cultural, they're very well read. So as Desiree was just saying, they have this feeling for the language. So they may not know what's strange, but they know there is something which is not quite right. So that's a barrier. So that's barrier number one. Get someone who's the very best translator, and do not be afraid to adapt your story. Remember that within your language geography, your language area, people know what feelings you express through certain words and ways of expressing yourself. But in the English-speaking world, they've got their own ways of understanding the world, of expressing themselves. And the things people say, well, but hold on a minute, James. Now, do you think that someone from Britain behaves somewhat just like someone in America? No, but we know how they behave. That's the thing. When I'm with my Scottish friends, with my English friends, with my American friends, my Australian friends, I know that it's different, but it's difference within the same realm, you know. And what they try to do is they write something from a different world, a different culture. They think that actually if you just translated words it's going to work. No, you have to adjust a few things, like a love scene. One thing's a love scene in Spanish, one thing's a love scene in English. And if you have a very well-trained translator, it can be done beautifully. However, remember that now, if you write in plain any language, it's going to be very easy to translate to other languages. And then you might have a chance of reaching an international market.
We're almost out of time, but that brings us nicely full circle to your first point, which is understanding your language geography. And interestingly, we always think English is the widest spoken language, but it isn't. Maybe English writers should be thinking about writing in English that's easily translatable to Spanish.
Absolutely, to any language, or Spanish people, something which is easy.
Exactly. Yeah, that was really interesting. Some good questions. And for our first relaunched live, I thought that was really excellent. Thank you very much, Rachel and James. Our hour is up. We've got a bonus few minutes and seconds. But before we go, I just wanted to remind everyone and say a huge thank you for joining the Your Story community. Make it your own. Put your profile up, engage, talk to your friends on your story, and keep a lookout. Next week, we'll be publishing our issue number 2 of the newsletter. We'll be having our next guest on the 7th of October, who is the lovely Rosemary Shapiro from the Sandy Shores.
7th of October. Today's the 7th of October.
Sorry, the 21st of October. Really sorry. Thank you for that. Yeah, Rosemary Shapiro and I were at university together, and she's written a wonderful book called The Mentor Within, full of self-help techniques and strategies. She's self-published, and she's going to talk about what lessons she learned, etc. So that could be an interesting one for people who don't have publishers and think it's quite difficult. So RSVP to that. And I can also announce that what's normally premium space for people who've signed up to the works. We're going to give for this month only, as our launch month, Zoom mentored writing space and live Q&A, free for all the members in our Your Story community. So do sign up for that. I'll be sending an email with the correct link so you can sign up for that. It's bonus, and tell your friends to join, and it's going to be good. It's all designed to promote the productivity of your work. So, okay, so happy writing, everyone. We'll see you in Your Story community. And there's a chat facility. If you need to speak to either Rachel, James, or myself, just make direct contact. And we'll see you on the 21st of October, which is our next one. So take care, stay safe, and look after yourselves.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Bye.